No, it's all good now. We're all good. It's as good as it's going to get. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
So we are still in chapter 6, Mishnah 6. Last week, we ended off speaking about Hamakir es Makoimo. We were speaking about the various things that a person needs, the qualities, in order to be able to acquire Torah. Terrible. So so we spoke about the fact that in order to acquire Torah, one of the things that we need to do is Hamakir es Makoimo. The person has to recognize that, they have to acknowledge their place. So that's what I had to do over here. I had to acknowledge my place relative to the camera in order for this thing to work. Hamakir es Makoimo. The person has to recognize their place. And one of the key things about Hamakir es Makoimo, to recognize our place, is to recognize where we are in the greater scheme of things. And that's going to speak directly to where we'll start today. Because the next thing on our list, which is the first one on today's list, is V'hasameach b'chelkoi. A person who is, how do you translate that? Happy with their lot. It's not really the correct translation. Sameach is not happy.
Content.
Sameach is definitely not content. Sameach is joyful. Sameach b'chelkoi means we are joyful, we are joyous in our lot. Now the two go hand in hand. Hamakir es makoimoi v'sameach b'chelkoi go hand in hand. Why? One of the key reasons that people often are not happy in life is because they're not honest about where they're holding. For example, there are two different ways that this could play out. One example is just simply physically. Very often we get upset. I needed this, I wanted that, it didn't happen, and we're all nose out of joint. How could Hashem do this to me? Ever hear people say that? How could Hashem do this? Doesn't Hashem know all of my commitment, all of my dedication, all of my Yiddishkeit? How could Hashem do X and Y to me? Hamakir es makoimoi. If a person has an objective, healthy perspective on where they are, then they're sameach b'chelkoi. Then it is much more likely that the person will be joyous in their circumstances and in their lot. So let's put this in context. There were two individuals, and they had a conversation that was a running conversation. So happens that they were both from Jews. But the one was from one school of thought and the other was from a different school of thought. The one school of thought was very focused on personal development, and the other school of thought was very focused on awareness of Hashem's greatness. So they had this running debate about who's got the right approach. So one day, the one fellow says to the other fellow, he says, you know the difference is between you and I? The difference is you spend the whole day thinking about Hashem, and I spend the whole day thinking about myself. So he says, that's right. That's why you should follow my path, right? Because you're thinking about yourself all day, and I'm thinking about Hashem all day. He says, hang on, I haven't finished. You think about Hashem all day, thinking Hashem owes me this, Hashem should do that. You spend your whole life thinking about what Hashem owes you. I spend my whole day thinking about myself. Wow, how blessed I am that Hashem does this for me, that Hashem does that for me. It's a matter of perspective. Hamakir es makoimoi. If we recognize who we are in the scheme, if we recognize how well we're doing in terms of our Yiddishkeit, hasameach b'chelkoi. I'm glad that I have these brachos from Hashem. Perhaps I deserve even less. It's definitely part of how a person could perceive things. Or to put it slightly differently. You get up in the morning, right? What's the first thing that you're supposed to do as a Jewish person? Or ideally, it's not something we're supposed to do. Ideally, we're so habituated that it just happens without us even realizing. Is what? Moderni. There's an interesting question about moderni. The question is the grammar correct? Don't you think it should say, Ani modeh? I thank Hashem. The grammar doesn't sound right. Modeh, thank or acknowledge, I Hashem. Doesn't sound right. So why don't we get up in the morning and start Ani Modeh? I hereby, in my capacity as a human being who has just been reconstituted this morning, with the powers invested in me, I hereby acknowledge Hashem. I hereby give gratitude to Hashem. That's not how we do it, right? How do we do it? Modeh, the first thing that we have to recognize is Modeh, that we have to be grateful to Hashem. Then you could start talking about Ani. Then you could start talking about self. Makiras Makoima, we've got to know where we belong. If we think that we come first, Ani, I am here, I exist, I have needs, I have expectations, and then Modeh, I'm going to acknowledge what Hashem has done. That's not a healthy way to live. Modeh, when I first acknowledge Hashem, which means there's purpose, which means there's responsibility, which means that there are gifts and blessings, and then I say Ani, that's a whole different place. Modeh, Ani, that helps a person to have simcha in their life. In fact, you can have the same discussion based on a very interesting nuance at the end of the Gemara in Kiddushin. Now when I say nuance, it means this. In Gemara, you very often have what we call a girsa. In other words, we quote something from the sages, but there are two versions about what the original statement was. And sometimes there's a very subtle difference between the two versions. At the end of the Gemara Kiddushin, there's a discussion about what responsibilities a parent has in the upbringing of their children. That's the famous Gemara about teaching your child to swim. And the Gemara also talks about the responsibilities in terms of education and providing the know-how so that your child, please God, one day can earn. So there's a whole conversation there. What is the ideal occupation that a person should try and follow? And unfortunately, the famous Jewish ones are not on the list. Doctors, lawyers, they're not on the list. So there are all the various discussions about what's the ideal, what kind of occupation should a person have. So at the end of the Gemara, one of the sages says as follows. He says, you have to realize, look around, have you ever seen an animal that doesn't have what it needs? No. Hashem has designed the world in such a way that animals are provided for, always. If it's a herbivore, there'll always be some plant to eat. If it's a carnivore, there'll always be prey. That's how it is. Hashem has designed the world that every creature has what it needs in order to survive. Then, here comes the part where there are two girsas, there are two versions. All of those creatures, lo nivru'u ela l'shamsheni. All of those creatures were created in order to assist humans in achieving what we have to achieve. So you can ride a horse, or an ox can pull your plow, or the rooster can wake you in the morning. They're all there in order to facilitate us doing what we need to do to serve Hashem. Here comes the two girsas. Va'ani, and I, nivresi leshamesh eskoini. I was created to service my Creator. So the whole argument of the Gemara is effectively saying, if they are provided for, and they are only, so to speak, secondary in the system because they help us to serve Hashem, then how much more so we who directly are supposed to serve Hashem, definitely Hashem is going to provide for us. So the line is, Ani nivresi leshamesh eskoini. I was created to serve my master. That is how makires makoimo. That's what it means to recognize my place. I'm here to serve. But there's another version. There's another girsa of how you're supposed to read this. Are you ready? Ani lo nivresi elo leshamesh eskoini. I was not created for any other purpose but to serve Hashem. What's the difference between the two perspectives? First perspective says, Ani nivresi. I was created. That is a fact. That is a reality. I'm a force to contend with. Hashem obviously feels that I'm worthwhile enough that He created me, and therefore I have rights. And I have expectations. Plus, nivresi leshamesh eskoini. I was created in order to serve Hashem. I also have responsibilities. And that is a valid way of prioritizing, or a valid way of creating perspective for ourselves in order to know that we're here to serve Hashem. But an even deeper makir es makoimoy, an even deeper perception of who we are, is ani lo nivresi. I don't really exist. There's nothing about me that is fundamentally worthwhile and therefore justifies my existence. Ella except for the fact, l'shamash eskoini, that I could serve Hashem. That's the one thing that justifies my life. That's makiras makoimoi. That's perspective. That's an appreciation and an understanding of who we are and where we fit in the great scheme of things. It's not that we're here living to service ourselves. We're here living in order to service Hashem. There's a story about a particular individual who came to the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the first Chabad Rebbe. And he had a whole litany of issues that he needed a brocha for, as we often do, right? Have a long list. It's coming up for Rosh Hashanah. You have to start compiling your list. All the things that you need to ask from Hashem for the coming year. So he stands there and he pours out his heart with all the various things. And at the end of it, the Alter Rebbe says to him, what you need, you have articulated very well. What you are needed for, you haven't even mentioned.
Oh.
That's perspective.
Yes.
That's perspective. That's hamakeres makoimoi. That's perspective, that we're not here just to leech off the world. There is nowhere, by the way, that we were given a contract that says Hashem will fulfill all of our heart's desires. It doesn't say that. We wish each other that Hashem should fulfill your heart's desires for the good, etc. But it's not a guarantee. It wasn't something that we were offered in advance before we got here. But we were put here to serve Hashem. La'ovda u'leshamra, right from the beginning. The very first human being was put on earth to serve. That's makiras makoimoi. That's understanding our place.
Does it say that about serving Hashem, or does it say about in the garden?
Okay, it's a good question. So when Adam was put into the garden, what does it say? He was put into the Garden of Eden, into the Garden of Eden, which quite frankly, I don't know about you, but our garden is not the Garden of Eden. And maybe yours is. So our garden, you've always got to worry about watering the plants and weeding things and mowing the lawn and all that stuff. When Hashem made Gan Eden, do you not believe that it was self-regulating?
Yes.
I mean, do you honestly think that Adam's first job was to take a lawnmower? So what does it mean when it says la'avda or l'shamra, that he had to work and he had to protect? It means spiritually. He had to invest spiritually in the space, because at that time in history, there was no such thing as thorns. There was no such thing as weeds. We know that was part of the curse after they were kicked out. So therefore, to work the garden obviously couldn't mean physically. It had to mean to work it spiritually, in other words, to serve Hashem, right from the beginning. Even if the garden was physical. And certainly if the garden was spiritual. So the message clearly there is to be able to serve Hashem, to work in the space to serve Hashem. That's why we're here. That's makir es makoimoi. So now that starts to create a thread. Remember, we said we're doing this Mishnah in clusters, where you've got these bunches of different messages. So now we're starting to see a thread, because just before this we learned about Kabbalah Sayisurim, the acceptance of suffering, acceptance of punishment or difficulties. I don't know which word you want to use. It doesn't say onshim, which is punishment. It says Yisurim, which is pain or suffering. So it all fits in the same thread. In order for a person to be in a position that they could access Torah, the key is to get out of the way. That's the key. Because unfortunately, the nature of the human being is that we naturally apply our preconceptions and our biases to the things that we engage with, and that blocks us from seeing things as they are. Now, that could be a bad decision when you're trying to calculate things in life. It's a devastating decision when a person's trying to learn Torah. One of the most fascinating things about watching history is that as much as people tell you that those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it, at the same time, those who do learn history are doomed to be stuck in it. Meaning to say, we all know that trying to predict the future based on what we already know typically fails. Right? So for example, it's a terrible example to use, but let's just use it. On the 6th of October, the Israeli Intelligence Society may well have believed that Israel was secure. And it's that belief that may have caused the lax attitude to what was going on the border. So what's historical is dangerous for what we need to know going forward. That's true in any area of life. It is certainly true in Torah. In order to acquire Torah, that's the theme of this chapter, Kinyan Torah. In order to acquire Torah, the first thing we have to do is get out of the way. We have to make sure that we're acquiring Torah, not something that suits our particular perspective. We touched on this already previously. That person shoots the arrow and then paints the target, where we're trying to fit the Torah's values into our values, and hopefully then we could feel comfortable within the Torah itself. Now we say this actually daily in our davening. Every single day. You know that part where we say, get out of the way? Where's the part where we say, get out of the way? In order to learn Torah. You know where we say it? Right at the end of the Shemona Esrei, right at the end of the Amidah. In the last paragraph. Because over there we say as follows, V'nafshi ke'afar lakol tiyeh. That my soul should be like dust to all. Now what's the link to Torah? Because the next thing we say is, Pesach libi b'sor yosecha. Open up my heart to your Torah. That means that the two go hand in hand, and in that order. That when a person is allowing themselves to be like dust, to recognize our place, that we are like our forefather Abraham said, "Va'anoichi afar va'efer." I'm nothing more than dust and ashes. And let's be honest, he was a very, very great man. And if he could say that he was like dust and ashes, and how much more so do we have to look at ourselves from that perspective? When a person is willing to have that degree of incredible humility, then you can open the heart to learn Torah. That is the theme of this cluster that we've been learning. Accepting things that are uncomfortable, being willing to recognize our place, and now we're at the point of Sameach Bechelkoi, where a person rejoices in their portion. Those all go hand in hand. And that's why this is all the precursor to learning Torah, because it's all describing different perspectives on what we call absolute humility. Who was the ultimate person who taught Torah to the world? Moshe. The most humble person on earth. Moshe. That's why he could be the conduit of Torah. Because he was so self-effacing, or because he was so invisible in the story. He didn't contaminate the Torah with his own perspective. I don't know if you've ever heard the cliche that people use where they say, who you are speaks so loud that I cannot hear what you're saying. And that's exactly what we want to avoid in order to be able to learn Torah. That who we are should not interfere with what we're trying to acquire, with what we're trying to access in terms of the Torah. So the expression that we use over here is v'nafshi ke'afar lakol tiyeh. My soul will be like dust. Here's an interesting thing. Very interesting. What's the nature of dust? Or earth, if you really want. Adama is more earth. What's the nature of dust? You walk on it. You walk on it. They tell the story that there was once a chassid who came to the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, with a big complaint. He said, every single time that I walk into the Beis Medrash, I feel like everybody tramples all over me. So the Tzemach Tzedek said to him, well, maybe if you didn't try and expand yourself throughout the whole Beis Medrash, people wouldn't have to trample all over you. In other words, what's he saying? If you want to be in the Beis Medrash, if you want to be in the place where you're learning Torah, then you can't be the person who sticks out. You've got to be, kind of below the radar. It's very interesting. The Gemara in Sota tells us, there's a whole section over there where it speaks about gasus haruach, which is effectively arrogance. And one of the things that it says, it quotes a pasuk, V'sasa b'sholem shilcha trivena, that talks about when you walk into a field and there are stalks of wheat, it's the tallest stalks that get cut down first. That's what the Gemara says. The tallest stalks get cut down first. And in the same way, it's talking about people who are arrogant are the people who get cut down first. What does it mean, cut down first? Well, in our particular context, it means they're the people who have the least likelihood of actually absorbing what the Torah has to say, because they're too caught up in their own heads. So what's Sameach Bechelkoi got to do with this? What does it mean to be joyous in our lot? Well, that's exactly what it is. A person who holds a very strong sense of self, and I'm not talking about a healthy self-esteem, which obviously is something you should have. We're talking about people who are full of themselves, find it very difficult to be joyous. Because they're constantly caught up in I still need X and Y, or deserve X and Y, and people are not giving me the respect that I deserve, and I'm not getting the brachas that Hashem owes me, and how could this be? I'm so good, and Hashem's not giving me the things that I deserve. All of that perspective robs us of simcha. So the great irony of simcha, and why it is relevant to acquiring Torah, is that the key to simcha is humility. The more humble a person is, the more joy they'll have in their life. I'm sure you know this, but there is an inversely proportionate graph that tracks expectation and happiness. The greater your expectation, the lower chance of happiness. That's why South Africans are so happy this year. Because we never expected to have electricity for so long. We're the happiest people around. Whereas in first world countries, they might have the power go out for half an hour and they'll be more depressed than us. Because simcha is relative to expectation, and expectation is relative to where we perceive ourselves in the picture, and that is the key of humility. Now we do know that when it comes to learning Torah, simcha is a key to learning Torah. Even though the way that we learn Torah is supposed to be, as the Gemara says, ba'ema, uvayira, uvareses, uvazeya, that we're supposed to learn Torah in such a way that we're in awe, as if we were standing physically at the foot of Mount Sinai, to the extent that we feel it so viscerally that we tremble, and we even perspire. That's what it says. Nevertheless, it also says, as David HaMelech writes in Tehillim, Sos anoichi al imrosecha kamoitzei sholol rov, that I rejoice, says David HaMelech, over your words, Hashem, like a person who has found massive treasure. If we don't have the capacity for simcha, and we don't have the ability to have simcha bechel koi in our current circumstances, then we have a block to the Torah. And it's quite logical. Because whose Torah is this that we're learning? Who's providing this Torah? What information is it? It's Hashem's Torah. It doesn't make any sense that a person should be all wound up and all stressed over the fact that I don't have what I need, and therefore I believe that Hashem's not providing in the way that He should, and simultaneously acquire Hashem's Torah. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. I have to be in a position that I'm willing to accept that moideh ani. First I acknowledge that whatever Hashem does is correct. And therefore chelkoi, the portion that I have in my life, is a source for simcha. And therefore, of course I want to accept Hashem's Torah. In fact, let's take it a step further. It's quite possible that a person with that attitude may not have things that other people believe you need in order to be happy, but because they have access to Hashem's Torah, that is what gives them simcha. The simcha will come from Torah. In fact, we can play on the words over here a little bit, because we say in our morning davening, Ashreinu matoiv chelkeinu. That's what we say. Ashreinu, we are praiseworthy or happy or blessed. It's not really blessed. It's more happy. Ma toiv chelkeinu. How amazing is our chelek, is our portion. What do we mean when we say that? What do we mean when we say it? Ashreinu ma toiv chelkeinu. So one of the explanations is that we are happy. Why? Because chelkeinu, we have a piece of Hashem's, so to speak, inheritance. Okay, we say that later because that's why I don't want to confuse the words. Later we say Mayafa Yerushalayinu in the same prayer. But a chelek, a piece of Hashem's legacy, Hashem's wisdom, is ours. Ma toiv chelkeinu. How amazing is our portion. So sameach bechelko doesn't just mean that I'm satisfied or happy or I appreciate what I have in my life and I count my blessings instead of focusing on what I don't have, as people tend very often by nature to focus on what they don't have instead of what they do have. This is not just one of those feel-good pop psychology things where we say, count your blessings and have an attitude of gratitude and all that stuff. That's not what we're saying. Chelkeinu, to acknowledge that our chelek, that we have a portion. What is our portion? Our portion is that Hashem has made Himself available to us in the highest form in His Torah. In fact, you may remember, because we already did this in the previous chapter, what do we say? That Hashem should rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. And then, the same Chelkeinu, give our portion in your Torah. Every single time that a person completes a tractate of Gemara, they do a siyum. In the siyum, one of the things that we say is, thank you, Hashem. We acknowledge Hashem. Shesamto chelkeinu miyoshvei beis hamedrash. that you gave us a chelek, you gave us a portion amongst those who come to a shir, amongst those who actually sit in a base medrash, the unique 1% of the 1% who actually has access to your Torah. Sameach bechelkoi, the person who rejoices over the fact that this is who we are, that this is what we have, that the Torah is our portion. That's obviously going to open the gateways to Torah. Can you imagine? And anybody knows this. If a person drags their feet into the room because unfortunately Nebuch put me, this is where I landed up, and I have to go to the shir every week, and if I don't go, then I'm going to be guilted by somebody tells me, we missed you at the shir, and where were you? And that's why I'm doing it. It's coming Elul, and Elul is a very scary time, so if you don't check in with God, who knows what's going to happen, God forbid. If that's why I'm coming to learn, the reality is I'm not going to get a hold of Hashem's Torah. But Sameach bechelkoi, when a person has simcha in the chelek, in the recognition of the fact that this is my portion, this is my gift, this is my privilege, that is for sure going to open a person's mind to be able to absorb and to digest Hashem's Torah in the way that it should be done. So now you see how the two go together. When I recognize what it is, you know who I am? I'm nobody. Mo ani or mi ani. What am I? Who am I? I'm just a puny little human being who's kind of trying hackneyed to do something for Hashem. And yet, this is my chelek. And yet Hashem has invited me in. I did nothing to deserve this. It's not like there was some kind of a course that everybody went on and I was the one who qualified to be able to get into the Torah, It's absolute. It's across the board. He's just who I am, and He's invited me into His embrace, and He's allowed me insight to see the world through His perspective. Hasameach bechelkoi, when you have that kind of simcha, obviously it's going to open a person's mind to be able to absorb the Torah as one should. We say, that's what we say. We're nothing. And then after that we say Ashreinu, right? So there you have it. That's the perspective. The more seriously we take ourselves, the more we block the opportunity to learn what Hashem has to say. The more honest we are about ourselves and recognize that we're here literally on His good grace as Modeh, the more open we are to accept and absorb what the Torah is. Then it gives us a very practical thing that we have to do, and that is v'ha'oiseh siyag lidvarav. One of the keys to be able to acquire Torah is to create healthy ring fencing for our words. What does that mean? What's a ring fence? It means that
Can you say that again?
ha'oiseh siyag lidvarav. Person who creates a fence around their words. What does it mean to create a fence around our words?
It's like siyag Torah.
Right, like we have exactly. We have a few different things. Shavasu siyag Torah, nedarim siyag leprishus, siyag lechochma shtika. There are various places where we use this expression as siyag. A siyag is basically a ring fence. It's a protection. So, ha'oiseh siyag lidvarav, if a person wants to be able to acquire Torah, one of the things that they have to do is they have to ring fence their words. Now, we've already seen previously that in order for a person, we said arichas sefosayim earlier on in this Mishnah, we said that in order for a person to acquire Torah, they have to use arichas sefosayim. And we said that the two meanings of what that could be, either it means to actually pronounce the words when we're learning Torah, not just to read it with our eyes, or it could mean arichas sefosayim, to make sure that outside of the time that we're learning Torah, we're also very careful about how we speak, because appropriate speech is going to influence, the fact that we're in the right headspace to learn Torah. This is different. This is ha'oiseh siyag lidvarav, means that when it comes time for us to start sharing Torah, so it's not like arichas sefosayim, which was talking about regular conversation outside of the space of Torah. Here we're saying specifically when we're sharing Torah, then we have to be careful, ha'oiseh siyag lidvarav, to make sure that we are protecting our speech so that things do not get misunderstood or misconstrued. We have a little bit of history with this, right? Anybody remember the history of where you've got to be careful what you say? The very first occasion of where things went pear-shaped because people were not careful about what they said. Anybody remember? Gan Eden. Because Hashem tells Adam, do not eat from the tree of knowledge. When the snake comes to Chava and says, why don't you eat from this tree? Then Chava says, oh no, we're not allowed to touch the tree. That was never stated. Ha'oiseh siyag lidvarav, if a person is careful about the way that they say things, then they will ensure that the Torah that they're sharing is actually the Torah. Now this is a very big deal. It's a very big deal because I don't think we necessarily pause to think about how easily we convey a message which in our minds is what we learned, but to the hearer is something else. I can't tell you how many times I've had people come back to me and say, I heard that you gave a shiur and you said X and Y. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way that I said that. It's recorded. You can go back and listen to the recording. But what does that tell you? That tells you how careful you have to be in the way that you share ideas of Torah, because when somebody hears something and the language that they're hearing is perhaps something you intended a little differently, can make a massive difference. Massive difference. Reminds me a little bit of the story. Reminds me a little bit of the story. I'll just use the pen for this for a sec. So, reminds me of the story of the guy who was a farmer, but he was illiterate, and he heard that for Pesach there's a lot of business to be made. He was a dairy farmer if you sell milk that is supervised and kosher for Pesach. So he went ahead and he got a mashgiach and did whatever he had to do, and he produced a whole lot of kosher Pesach milk. And then he put a sign outside his farm, because there was a lot of foot traffic on the road that passed his farm, advertising his milk. And nobody came. He had no business at all. So eventually he was very frustrated, and he called a friend of his to help him out. What's he doing wrong? What's wrong with his marketing? And they discovered that it was all in the signposting. Because what he had written on the sign was, he wrote, the milk is kosher for Pesach. Which reads, Hakelev kashur lapetach, that the dog is tied to the gate or to the entrance. And that would explain why nobody was coming to get his milk, because it actually looked like beware of the dog sign. So you've got to be careful how you say. In your head, it all makes sense, but it could be that the person on the other end, the reader, the end user, the listener, might hear something completely different.
Is it sort of also like the Meraglim? They went and also
It's a good question, because the Meraglim were not teaching Torah, right?
No.
So and the Meraglim did have ill intentions. Here we're talking about people who have good intentions. In other words, and this happens to us all the time. I guarantee you, if you pay attention, you'll see how frequently it happens that we believe we're sharing something correctly and appropriately, and the way that people hear it is completely different. I'll tell you a funny thing that happened to me once. It wasn't so funny, but it's funny in retrospect. There was one time I was speaking in Shul on a Shabbos, and I don't even remember what the context was, but I made a joke about people who come for the Kiddush. People who only come for the Kiddush. As it happens, there was a person in Shul who's not a member of the community who had come for a simcha that day, and when I said that line, that people who only come from the Kiddush, I guess at that particular point I was looking in their direction, because I tend to look around the room. So they took it that I was criticizing them, that they'd only come to Shul because they were invited to the Kiddush that day, and they were very offended. And I had absolutely no idea that this had even happened. So that's the point. That's the degree to which we have to be aware of what you say. Be careful what you say, because you don't know how. And that's benign, because the worst is, you go over and you say, I had no intention of embarrassing you. When a person's teaching Torah and somebody listening gets the wrong idea, it could spawn a whole misbehavior or who knows what. How it evolves down the line. So therefore, to be very careful how we convey Torah is a key to acquiring Torah.
But isn't it also in a way to get things to do what suits you? Like you want something, you want to say, you think something's a halacha on Shabbos, or not a halacha on Shabbos, or a malacha.
Yeah.
So you want it to not to be a malacha, so you misconstrue what someone
Exactly.
says, or hear what someone...
Exactly.
I've
So-
heard someone said that this rabbi said that you can do this on Shabbos.
So the point is that
You
there's
ask
the responsibility of the listener as well. Absolutely. There's definitely the responsibility of the listener. But let's take this one step deeper.
So can I just
in
ask
terms-
you, Devarah only Torah or generally?
All of the Mefarshim say that this is referring to words of Torah. Okay, that specifically in words of Torah, that's where we have to be careful. Because again, Arichas V'Sayim, we've already discussed that generally speaking, we have to be careful how we speak. But I think the key thing over here is, what it's all going to boil down to, is our theme in this particular cluster is about humility. And often, when a person's trying to convey an idea, they want to just put in a particular angle, either to make themselves look good, or because they want to touch on something which happens to be popular in the crowd. And that's the warning of here. Make sure that the words that you're saying are actually the words of the Torah. I had a shir, this is an amazing thing. When I went to yeshiva in Israel, so we had always been told that there was this legendary chassid who was in the yeshiva there, Reb Mendel Futterfass, who had fought for Jewish life in Russia and had spent years and years in Siberia, and he was this incredible person, and if you had the opportunity to go to his shir, you should go to his shir. So I thought that this shir must be the most amazing thing ever. So I came to the shir, and there was a group of us. We went to his shir every single morning before the yeshiva seder started in the morning, every single morning for 2 years. You know what his shir was? He would take the book and read it. That was the shir. And we'd ask him, can you explain and whatever? He'd say, but you've got the words in the original. What could you possibly add to that? It was the most phenomenal experience. And the experience ended up being hearing how he learned the words. Without explanation, it was a phenomenal experience. How he learned the words without having to add any words. Can you imagine that? A person who ring fences their words so that they make sure that they're not adding words that are not actually what the Torah said, but perhaps what they'd like people to hear or what they would like to convey, etc. It's a very big ask. It's not easy to do this.
So can I just say this? Every morning when we bless that we've been asked to learn the Torah, we actually say, may the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths.
Right.
Because that must also be, that they should be accurate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we dive,
Absolutely.
We actually dive
To ask 100%. 100%.
So it's all in the siddur actually.
Yeah. 100%. The last piece of this cluster is what? The einoi machazik toiva la'atzmoi. The person does not take credit for themselves. Now we're going to see this theme repeated right at the end of the list, because right at the end of the list we're going to speak about the value of quoting something in the name of the person who said it, because it is so tempting for us to take the credit for things that are not ours. For a person to take the credit for the fact that, for example, they quoted the Torah. Well, can you imagine? You don't quote the source. So you become like this big deal, and who knows what, the next thing you could become some celebrity with all this great wisdom that you're teaching. If you want to access the Torah, it has to remain the Torah. It can't become a personal thing. I've got this wisdom that I've created, the method, I've created this new method. What method? It's in the Torah. The Torah says it. It's very interesting. The Maharal says on this that you have to realize, and this is such a profound insight, you have to realize that we don't get to choose how intelligent we are. We do get to choose how much we develop our intelligence. We do get to choose how much we use our intelligence. We don't get to choose how intelligent we are, and we don't get to choose what kind of intelligence we have. Some people are more logical, some people are more creative. When it comes to learning Torah, some people, Gemara is their thing. It speaks directly to their mind, their intellectual process, they love the logic, that's the thing, and they excel in Gemara. Some people love mysticism because they have a more abstract mind, a more esoteric mind. So that's what grabs them. Some people enjoy the history, so they love Tanakh, and so on and so forth. So, Eino Machzik Tova La'atzmo, says the Maharal, means when a person excels, when a person's doing well in their Torah learning, when a person is flying and they've progressed and perhaps they're teaching other people and they're moving at a pace that others maybe are unable to, instead of looking in the mirror and saying, whoa, look at me, what an amazing person I am, a person should recognize that that was a gift that Hashem gave us. The abilities that we have, the intellect that we have, the insight that we have, the speed of our grasp, that is Hashem's gift to us. Fits directly into our theme. Our theme is humility is the gateway to acquiring Torah. The moment a person starts to think, I am the driver, I am the success story, I am the master, that becomes a barrier to learning Torah. Whereas when a person says, Baruch Hashem, Moideh Ani, I get up in the morning, I don't only thank Hashem for the fact that I woke up this morning, but I thank Him for Ani, I thank Him for who He made me, and the skills that He gave me, and the way that He wired my brain, and therefore I have the privilege of being able to learn Torah, and to learn Torah successfully, and etc. That kind of humility, that's what opens up the door, that we should be able to actually access Hashem's Torah in its pristine form, in its truest form, instead of in our, so to speak, contaminated form, based on our perceptions and our attitudes. Okay, so that is a very, very important theme about Torah. Our next cluster is a whole different concept. It sounds a little bit more emotional, about love, the love that we have, that we're beloved to Hashem, etc., which please God will do next week.